Hey everyone, welcome back to Tuesday Tea with me, Alisha Bowker Mudrock. Today we have a guest, Elizabeth. She and I just completed a year-long business course together. So I've had the opportunity to get to know her over a long but very important year. And I asked her to come on today to really talk to us about this concept of change and making those big leaps and talking us through how that might feel really intimidating or scary, or where do we even start? But Elizabeth has some of her own really awesome experiences she was in one career and then sort of midlife totally switched to another. She also had a lot of change in her childhood. So she is a great expert, not only because of her therapist background and other expertise, but just personally, I know she has a lot of good experiences and information to share with us. So I'm happy her here today. We're going to get into it, but I just want to thank you for coming on today, Elizabeth. And I'll kind of open it up to you. Give me some thoughts, some insights when we think of this word change and kind of what that looks like or means to you.
So change is incredibly scary for everybody, myself included. And I think where a lot of people get stuck on the word is if you look at the surface of my life, it looks like I've done a lot of change. And don't get me wrong, I've had my moments. And a lot of times people like me, if you don't look closely, you see more change than you think you do.
Hmm.
Great example is moving.
Mm-hmm.
I've moved my whole life, right? From the
Mm-hmm.
very beginning, I've moved all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Changing for me is actually staying. That is really hard for me.
Wow.
I can move tomorrow and it wouldn't freak me out in the slightest. Asking me to commit to someplace for 5 years is terrifying.
Wow. Yeah.
So the first part of change I always tell people is really being clear on what change is and not looking at people who seem like they have a lot of change and thinking, oh yeah, they change all the time. Why can't I do it? I'll tell you right now, if they're changing all the time, they're actually in their safe zone,
Ah.
right? Change is hard for everybody, whatever it looks like on the surface. And so the first part is just recognizing what is the comfort and what is the discomfort and why do you want to change? Like there's
Mm-hmm.
nothing inherently good about moving every 2 years or good about staying for 20 years. Like
Right. There's pros and cons to both, right? You're
there's
gonna
pros
win.
and cons to both. So if you actually want to lead into a change, you have to identify for yourself,
Mm.
why is this important? How is this going to help you grow? Because that's what's going to help you stick to it. Because it's going to get hard and messy and complicated, and you're going to want to run back to your comfort zone. So,
Yeah.
again, an example for me is I'm going to run back to, I hate this apartment. Let's just move.
Yeah. Yeah.
California sucks. Let's just move.
Right. Right. We'll just find somewhere else, pick up and start over.
Right. And so I got to find why it's important to me to stay.
Hmm.
Somebody else, it might be like, why is it important for me to move?
Right. Like that idea of picking up is like, oh my God, that's terrifying. Right. They're like, no, of course I would stay even if I don't like it. So it's like you said, that unique, what is the change for you and what's the discomfort versus the comfort zone? And why are we maybe living in one versus the other? And neither is bad, but we need to be aware and make it obvious and have that choice, not just like default to either running away or staying something so comfortable, even if it's really bad for us or not serving us or not letting us grow.
Yeah. And oftentimes the fear is what tells us what is the change we need.
Yeah.
Right. And I love that. I wish I could take credit for it. It's from Carl Jung, but it's awesome. It's a great way to look. But it doesn't mean we look at terrifying things and like go run towards them. Like there's a reason we're scared of cliffs. There's a reason we're scared of snakes and spiders. But it is saying, hey, this is super scary. Why? Why
Hmm.
would it help me run towards it? What would I get from my life? How would I grow from this? Okay, now how can I do this in a sustainable way? And I say sustainable over safety
Mm-hmm.
because inherently going towards something scary is not particularly safe.
Okay. Yeah.
Um, But sustainable is the key, right? Because so often change is scary because we failed at it in the past. And so often we failed at it because we don't think about it as a sustainable change.
Mm-hmm. So like our goal or our execution was too lofty. Like we didn't have enough small steps. Is that what you mean? Like we just were like, I'm gonna run the marathon. You put the shoes on, you don't make it 26 miles or whatever because you didn't
A
do anything.
marathon is actually a great example on what I don't mean. Because a
Okay.
marathon is a checkbox.
Okay.
We are all great at checking the box. Oh my God, it feels so good. I think about this video. Check the box. I did a video. I'm done.
Yeah.
Except,
Yeah.
oh, wait, you're not. Because what you're really trying to do is become a thought leader in the space. And that includes doing weekly videos. That includes continuing to reach out to people. That includes continuing to find other formats and other forums to talk about stuff. It is a sustained process, a sustained mindset. It is not checking a box.
Okay.
And so when we get too lofty, what I mean by that is we'll get there eventually. I want you to have the lofty dream. Like the
Yeah.
change is hard and big, like pick a big one. But no, it's not a checkbox. It's changing something fundamental every single day. Every single day, I have to choose to stay in California. I can't just make the checkbox once. It's not like the desire to pick up and see somewhere new doesn't occur to me tomorrow and the day. I woke up today and I was like, what would it be like to live in New Zealand? It was an awesome thought. And I
Yeah.
had to actively choose, like, no, I'm choosing to stay in California
Right.
because
Right.
XYZ.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. No, that's a great way to frame it. Of that, the sustainable piece comes in when it's so it sounds almost too like I think James Clear talks about this in Atomic Habits. It's like this change is a part of you. It's not an external thing. It's like I am a runner, so I run all the time, not just one marathon. I'm a person who lives like a runner would live, or I am a California resident, so I'm gonna like that embody that, not just like I, sometimes live here, sometimes live right. Like it's finding how to internalize the change piece, the habit building piece, the goals to be more in the essence of us versus it just being this thing in
Yeah.
our environment, so to speak.
And that can often be too scary at the beginning. Like I remember the first time I really thought about like not moving away
Mm,
and what that would mean for me. And that is, it's still too scary for me. If you
mm.
told me today that I'm going to live in California for the rest of my life, I'd be like, no, I'm not.
Yes, yes,
Not, no, thank you. Not going to happen.
yes.
But I can say to, I have been here, and this is going to sound crazy to people who both love to move and who hate to move. I've lived here now for 17 years, which is the longest I've ever lived anywhere in my entire life.
Wow. Yeah.
Even saying it out loud makes me cringe back and go, no, no, I should move right this minute.
Yeah. Too long, too
And
long.
the only way I've even made this possible is if you actually look at my address history, I've moved every 2 to 3 years. I've just
Within.
stayed in the Bay Area.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
In fact, I've been in this apartment now for 3 years, and every inch of me, I get on Zillow every single day just to move to one town up, just to be like, well, what would San Mateo be like? Let me just see what that's like.
Yeah.
So again, I look like I've changed. Have I really changed? Right? Like there's that piece. There are pieces that have. I
Mm-hmm.
sustain it in small ways. And part of it is saying, I don't have to be this change for the rest of my, I don't have to be a Californian for my whole life. And
Yeah.
that actually lets me relax and go, okay, I'm committing to 1 more year.
Yeah.
I'm committing to 5 more years, whatever is comfortable to you. But even if it's a small change, like a diet change or a relationship change, I encourage people not to say, I'm this for the rest of my life. Because frankly, you're not. We all change all the time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But looking at it, I love that you structured everything in seasons. I do everything in seasons too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is I right now I'm in the season of building my career, and that career is going to be in California,
I
right?
love that. Yeah.
And right now I'm in a season of growing relationships. So I need to stay in one place. So
Yeah.
that means right now staying is helping me grow.
Yeah.
But if I want to move when I retire when those are no longer true, when it'll help me in my next phase, then that's something to consider then.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I think about diets. People get crazy and they're like, I'm going to be on this restrictive diet the rest of my life. I'm like, no, you're not.
Right,
Who would want to have that life? That's insane.
right, right. And it doesn't make sense.
But hey, for the summer months, why don't we make a small change where you're focused on eating a lot of salads?
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, that's like you're just committing for 3 months or
Mm-hmm.
a year. Like
Mm-hmm.
really looking. And so if it feels like, oh, I could do that for 2 years, like, oh, okay, cut it in half.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
put your
Because you
commitment
can
to
do it
yourself.
for 2 years, but let's start smaller and you can keep adding on, right? It's easier to add, I think, mentally for us than it is to fail or sometimes like not take away, but if the mark is here, I brushed my teeth, check, cool. Now I can add another goal versus like I need to do these 50 things. And if I don't do all 50, I failed and I feel like shit versus, oh, I did 10 things. I feel pretty good about that because I was pacing myself at a more sustainable level or meeting myself kind of where I'm actually at today in this moment with whatever things.
So that's actually the part I want them to check in on. It's not that, because look, everybody has different energy levels. We happen to know a lady who can do a million things in a day. And I look at her and I go, I just want to take a nap. I
Yeah,
can't. And I look at other people and I'm like, you could do one more. Like, come
yeah,
on, like
yeah.
one more thing. Like we got it. Um, Everybody's different, but it's that piece of checking in. The reason I want them to cut it in half isn't because they might not be able to do it. Which some might not, and that sucks, and is defeating. But I want them to cut it in half because the real shift is checking in with themselves. It's
Mm,
saying, is this still serving me?
mm,
Is this still like moving is a great example. Right now, California is changing.
mm-hmm.
Everything is changing. Our field is changing. The people around me are changing. This might be an amazing goal for me right now. And in 6 months, it might not be the right goal for me because I've
Right,
outgrown it.
right, right.
And so I want them to cut it short because I want them to be checking in. What is the thing they want to be growing towards, changing towards now?
Hmm.
Not get stuck on, well, I've got to check this box. I got to do it.
Right. I said I would do it for 2 months. Like I have to keep doing it, even if it's not serving or beneficial any longer. Sometimes we got to throw it out or rethink it or adapt it a little differently.
Exactly.
We wouldn't
Like,
know that if we're not looking inward, right? We're just on autopilot. There's a disconnect between the motion that we're going through and how it's actually helping, changing, growing, serving, edifying us on a deeper level.
and a marathon's actually a really great simple example. If we're stuck on the fact that I've signed up for a marathon, I'm doing the marathon turkey trot on Thanksgiving, like, and I've got to run my 13 miles today to stay on my planning, but I sprained my ankle. I got a hamstring pull,
Yeah.
or I woke up sick. Like maybe it's easy to let that derail us if we're so focused on that goal. Whereas if we're saying, hey, I am training for a marathon, I'd like to do the turkey trot one, and I can do another one because it's more important to me that I build the habits of being a runner, having a community of runners, right?
Right.
Like all the things around it.
Right.
But right now, my body is telling me that something's not quite working. So I need to take a step back and look at the field first before I continue.
Mm-hmm. So do you have any like exercises or tools that you use or could recommend folks could use of how to engage in that sort of self-reflection, checking in? Like how does one know that they are in alignment or how do they put what are the questions to ask or the things to do to check in around kind of where we're at or what's going on?
Alisha, you sound like every client who's like, just tell me what to do. Just tell me what to do. And you're having to give the same answer you give, right? Which it depends on the person. What I can give are examples of what I do
Yep.
and adapt them for what works, right?
Yep.
I do two very specific things. I create space in my calendar every year. Well, actually, I do it every quarter because I find my energy levels, my interest levels
Mm-hmm.
have shifted about every season. So I do it by the seasons. Other people do it by quarters,
Mm-hmm.
whatever you want. It's whatever
Yeah.
cadence works on how your life changes. I recommend seasons a lot, especially if you have children, because they, like, you think you know your kids and then boom, they've changed on you on a dime.
Right.
And it's just because the nature of kids, right? So especially for parents, I would encourage you to do it every 3 to 4 months. But again, like, I know in the summertime, committing to a workout routine, I am on it. You ask me to do that in January, I'm gonna be like, can we? No, no, like, it's cold. What if
Yeah.
we just met for coffee? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
and instead of being mad at myself and getting angry at that, like, I just set myself up by doing it on a season basis, so
Mm,
that I have different expectations for myself and I'm growing in different directions in those seasons. So that's one. It's just setting up a cadence with yourself to check in.
yep.
The second one I say is do something that makes you look at it differently. So a lot of people who know me, I'm an East Coast and a West Coast girl. And that could mean a lot of things, but what I think of it internally is like the East Coast is all about just the facts, ma'am.
Yep.
None of this woo-woo nonsense, like keep it
Yeah.
straight and narrow. And the
Yeah.
West Coast is like, oh, let's read our chakras. Let's look at the
Yeah.
stars, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And they both have their pros and cons. But they're constantly in battle inside of me, right? And so depending on the season, I will lean into the one that feels uncomfortable. So
Hmm.
for instance, I recently did a tarot reading. And it's not because the East Coast part of me is like, that's some BS, like whatever. But what I like about it, what it helps me with when
Yeah.
I'm leaning hard into my East Coast side is it's forcing me to look at my life different. Because all tarot is, right, is projection of your life
Yep.
on to another interpretation. So
Yep.
that other interpretation, it's like, oh, what about this interpretation is making me uncomfortable? What is it that I don't like? What is
Right.
it that is a little bit scary?
Right.
Okay, maybe that's what I need to lean into and find a path through over the next 3 months.
Hmm. Mm-hmm.
The flip side of that is when I'm leaning hard into my mystical, looking at the universe side, I'm like, huh, maybe I need to lean more into the science. And suddenly I start going, okay, cool that this sounds awesome, that this is what the fates have aligned. Let's get some practical. What would
Right.
it look like if I actually looked for the science behind whatever I'm leaning
Yeah.
into it?
Yeah.
What is the research saying? What is the research not available for? What are other people in the community doing that
Mm-hmm.
supports or doesn't support this?
Mm-hmm.
Because in that moment, I want to just trust to the fates, right?
Yeah.
And so it feels uncomfortable to say like, okay, we can't just trust the fates. Let's look for this. So again, it's for me, those are my dichotomies, and it's how I lean into the uncomfortable and the scary and the change.
Yep.
Everybody have their version, but if you set up a cadence, you start to check in which piece makes me uncomfortable and you lean into,
Mm-hmm.
instead of going, I'm going to lean into the comfortable piece, you go like,
Mm-hmm.
"Okay, I'm going to lean into the uncomfortable piece."
Yeah. Yes.
You will start to create that change in yourself, whether you want to or not.
Yes. I definitely resonate with that. I've always like a little mantra in my head is, like always try to live in the discomfort. That's where the real like growth happens. And again, living in some discomfort doesn't mean your life is so uncomfortable and you're never like allowed some peace or rest or like joy. But I too have moved a lot, and I find every time I've moved, I didn't dislike where I was. I was in a great place. I had friends. I often moved when I was like really comfortable. And for me to get out of that like stagnant space, the move was my discomfort, was my like, okay, I got to mix it up. I got to change it up. Like I'm not growing how I want to be growing right now. Now, no, people don't literally need to physically move like to different states or whatever else. But what's your version of that, right? Like, how do you mix it up? How do you pull out the thing that's going to make it a little uncomfortable, push you a little bit more, make you have to think about what you're doing and be more engaged because something's new or not as familiar or not like a thing we're just like are really excellent at. We have to try harder. We have to pay attention more. We have to be more present with it, right? It's like autopilot drive home. I don't have to think because I do this route all the time. And if I'm going somewhere new, I have to like, what's happening? Where am I going? Right. So it's almost like turning off that autopilot, whether it's just mixing up a little thing, just spicing it up a little, or it's trying something totally new, picking up a whole new hobby, physically relocating, changing a job, starting a new graduate program. Like it doesn't always have to be so big. I think the smaller changes, again, are the more long lasting and like sustainable ones. But how can we even make the workout routine you've done for the last 5 years a little bit different, a little spicier, that you have to be a little more present for it? And I think that is so doable, but like we are so big and bold and black and white. I think sometimes people forget that there are little small ways we can introduce the discomfort that does produce the best results without it having to be something like huge or monumental or so exhausting or hard that like it's not actually possible or it's going to take too much energy, you know?
Well, I think the career change is actually a great example of this. I did it by accident. I wasn't in therapy at the time. I was 100% into the tech world. It's how I ended up in California in the first place.
Mhm.
And I ended up by a set of circumstances, and I was just insanely burned out. Like if you had talked to anybody around me at the time, I would have checked every box that there was on burnout. And
Yeah,
so I was like, I need some time to figure my stuff out.
right.
Am I staying? Am I going? What am I doing? And what I was doing was I was slowing down and giving myself a check-in. But I remember really clearly, I was going to give myself 1 year off. And I had worked since I was 15. So taking
Mhm.
a year off was terrifying.
Right,
That was a big change in and of itself, but it was a checkbox decision. Oh, I can take 1 year off. Okay.
right.
But I did do something really interesting, which is I told you I move and travel all the time. I love it. The painting behind me is from Vietnam. If you look around my house, I can name like 10 countries off the top of my list. And I decided I wasn't going to travel. I already knew I'd like to travel. I already knew I'd meet a bunch of people. I already knew who I was while I traveled.
Right.
I love Eat, Pray, Love. There's a lot of things for a lot of people that's amazing. But for me, that would have been my comfort zone. So I said,
Yeah.
what is the most uncomfortable thing I could do right now? It was like, ooh, I could just sit with my thoughts for a year. And I was like, what are all the things you've never done? Because you've never,
Yeah.
because again, that East Coast, right? I had never taken an art class. I took
Hmm.
math and science and AP and hard charging, and you got to get somewhere. So I took a pottery class,
Hmm.
right? I said, you get to read whatever you want. Not what you should read, not a book for school, not an Atomic Habits to make you better. You get to read
Right,
whatever
right,
you want.
right.
I was like, you need to get to know yourself a little bit. That's the uncomfortable piece. Because
Mhm.
going to see Machu Picchu or going to see the Mona Lisa, like, that's fun. But I already knew I'd like it and move on and check that box. So it was
Right.
like, okay, you got to sit with who you are. And
Mhm.
that was super uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Everybody's at work. It's not like my friends could hang out with me all day. Like I'm
Right,
all
right.
by myself.
No distractions.
Exactly. Trying to figure this out. And one of the things I always tell people is just because you're uncomfortable, just because it's scary, doesn't mean you have to move on that decision. So I'm sitting there and I'm collecting information about what should I do next? Should I go back and just go back into tech on what I knew? Should I change
Mhm.
careers? Like, what should I do? And I had no idea the right information. But then I said, okay, what are the things you read regardless of what you're like? It doesn't matter if you're on vacation or at home. What like, and psychology kept coming up
Interesting.
over and over and over. Sociology and psychology over and
Hmm.
over. And I was like, hey, I like this no matter how out I am. I like this no matter how much I'm working. I like this when I'm on vacation. I
Hmm.
like this over and over. And so I was like, oh, I don't know that I have enough information yet. This is a big change. I'm taking like
Yeah.
lifestyle, everything. So I just took one class. I was like, it's great to read a book. Let's take a class that's not about the fun stuff. Let's just see how you feel with that.
Yeah.
And so I took an abnormal psych because the stuff I like to read about isn't necessarily abnormal psych. What I like to read about is relationships and societies and communities. So I took one about,
That's totally
schizophrenia
different.
and depression and all that side. And I loved every second of it. And so that's the moment. And that's what I tell people. I'm like, stepping into discomfort is giving yourself some new information. But when it was like that last piece just unlocked it inside, and now my gut settled down. It wasn't scary to take the leap, to change
Yeah.
careers, to apply to grad school, to go do therapy, because I'd gotten that last piece of information,
Right.
right? So when you're thinking about that big final decision, you don't have to make it blind and take a leap of faith. Give yourself more information, because there will be a piece of information, nobody can tell you what it is,
Right.
that settles in your gut and goes, done, you know it, do this. And
Mm-hmm.
that has held true for me for like the past 10 years, is the discomfort is putting myself out there to get the new information
Yeah.
and then waiting. And it's uncomfortable to wait. I want to take action.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Why do I like moving so much? Oh, you just pick a place, pack the boxes, move. It's awesome.
Right.
Action.
Right.
And
Right.
so collecting the information and going, okay, now I have it's settled. I know. Now I will act.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that. I think that's a really good reminder. And it all ties back to, if we're not listening, if we're not tuning in, we'll miss that gut moment. We'll explain it away. We'll ignore it. We won't even realize it happened. Right. And again, there's nothing wrong with living a life that's just really comfortable and not much happens. And it like, that's fine. But I think, like, for at least a lot of the folks I know listening in, and like for our personalities, I don't want just that. I want to always be leveling up in some way. That again does not mean like you have to be famous and make $3 trillion and be the CEO of everything. Like, for some people, yeah, that's their leveling up. But I think just in your own personal life, it's like, how can you constantly just be a little bit more aligned, a little bit of that more like empowered version of you. And we change as years change, so we have to kind of be going with the ebbs and flows. But at the end of the day, like, what a treat for ourselves, right? To be have walked into the workout that I actually like better than the one I've been doing all these years, and it makes me even feel better. Or this food that's even a little more delicious and good for my body and doesn't make me feel like crap after I eat it. Or this trips I do like to take, or these people I wanted to know, or this pottery hobby. Like my friend Melanie was on a few times ago and talked about how she found that as like an outlet, but she didn't know, and she took that risk, and now she's like insanely good at it and loves that space. So life wouldn't be bad without it, but it could be better with it. So why not get in the weeds a little, get in a little uncomfortable, like listen to what information we are telling ourselves and then do something helpful with it, or just sit on it, but at least be aware, because the payout is tenfold, I think, for really the scheme of like how much we actually have to put in. We're going to get paid that back and more for that level of energy, you know.
I mean, the last piece I'll just add is, and I'm biased because I'm a therapist and you're biased because you're a therapist. But, when I really dig, depression is complicated and confusing, and there's a lot of things going on there. And this is overly simplified, but a lot of times there's a fear of being themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Change is really just being like, you know what? Actually, I'm not a person who wants X. I actually want Y. And the scary thing is, okay, but what if Y is hard? And I'm like, well, it's going to be. Let's just assume it's hard
Right.
because you're making a change. Of course, it's going to be hard.
Right.
But I bet you're a little less depressed if we start showing up as you. Because even if you get rejected as
You were
you
still you.
don't have the fear that they would reject you if they just knew who you were.
Right. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And that is a hard shift. It's an amazing shift. And yet that kernel is there. Everything again is a little bit different, a little, right? But that little piece of helping them figure out who the heck they are and that it's okay for it to be hard.
Yes. It's
a l- Yeah. So it's that change again, like you were saying, like, why live that life? It's not about the comfort, discomfort, the leveling up so much as it's just like the closer you can come to yourself and allow yourself to grow and change and be uncomfortable. Actually, the more you can just breathe and relax into a really great life, whatever that happens to be.
yeah. And I think the more whole you actually feel.
Yeah. So
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much. Is there anything that you want to promote or share? Or I have like your links in the email so folks can find you on your website, your Instagram, things like that. But anything you want to kind of highlight before we say goodbye?
um yeah, actually it's funny because my mind immediately jumped to couples, which I know is going to drive people crazy. They're going to be like, but it is really hard to change by yourself. And doing
Mhm.
it with somebody is so much easier. And so I would encourage anybody who's depressed to actually start with couples counseling instead of individual.
Mhm.
Because having that back and forth, having that space to be allowed to grow and change with the people in your life.
Mhm.
I mean, I always tell this with kids. I won't see a kid unless I can see their parents every
Yeah.
month, because how much control does a kid have over their environment? They need the environment to change in
Right.
order for them to change.
Right.
I think it's the same with people, with individuals, with couples, with companies. Um, I don't do a ton of this work, but I do a little bit of work with companies. And again, I focus on changing middle management,
Yeah.
because they're the ones who have the most power to change the culture and the environment and everything going on in there. And
Yeah.
so that's what I would just say is, don't try to go it alone. That's hard and scary, and um, try to bring somebody with you, whether it's a best
Mhm.
friend or a partner or whatever. So
Yeah.
I offer couples care. I don't know if you do, but I know lots of people do, and lots of people are scared of it and they think it's about blame. It's not. It's about helping you guys be better together and making it slightly safer. So I would just encourage that.
I love it. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here. We have lots more coming this month as well, and next month. But in the interim, have a great rest of your Tuesday, and we'll see you
Thank you
later.
for having me. See you later.
Bye.